Scholars working in ethnic studies use a similar format in putting together their journal articles. It's quite standardized. It begins with a headline, followed by an abstract, a list of keywords, an introduction, and often in the introduction they're doing a literature review, a description of the methodology used, who they talked to, how they went about it, what they've collected, and then a discussion of their findings, followed by a conclusion, which will often point to further research that's needed in the field. And finally, there'll be a reference list at the end of the article. My presentation is based on my analysis of 3 academic articles published in the field of ethnic studies. Like most other fields in academia, scholars writing in the field of ethnic studies share a discourse. And in looking at this discourse in these 3 articles, I found that they use a discourse that makes assumptions about readers' familiarity with the agenda of ethnic studies, and that also signal the field's essential themes, that is, what they're focused on and what they're looking at. So this discourse reflects ethnic studies' values and goals. The field of ethnic studies is interdisciplinary, which means that people looking at these issues come from different academic disciplines. It might be gender studies, ethnic studies, environmental sociology, political science. They share common interests, as this ethnic studies community map shows. They are focused on examining the social, political, cultural, linguistic, and other types of experiences of historically marginalized, racialized groups within social structures dominated by whites. What they value is qualitative research that unveils how these racialized groups are marginalized in white society. They use a very specialized vocabulary that includes terms such as multiculturalism, historical white spaces, colorblindness, minority-majority groups, students of color, capitalists, race politics, white supremacy, and inclusiveness. The specialized genres used by the ethnic studies discourse include academic journals, scholarly books, conferences, and associations. It is common and typical for researchers working in ethnic studies to use qualitative research. This is different from quantitative research, which counts and measures things. So quantitative research is something you might see in the biological sciences, for example. But qualitative research, according to Berg, focuses on the what, how, when, and where of a thing, its essence and ambiance. And I particularly like the word ambiance because it's talking to people, it's seeing how they feel about things, their reaction to events and experiences in their own lives. Qualitative research focuses on the meanings, concepts, definitions, characteristics, metaphors, symbols, and descriptions of things. So again, this is different from quantitative research, which counts and measures things. Because scholars working in ethnic studies are using qualitative research methods, their sample sizes are often quite small. Personal experience is valued, with the author or authors often using personal pronouns and identifying themselves in their work. This is different from quantitative research methodology because in those sorts of articles about the research studies, the authors are typically not saying, I found this and I did this and this happened to me. So qualitative research allows authors and scholars to unmask themselves and share their own experience. That's valued in the field. In the research articles that I looked at, this small sample size was evident. In one of the papers, 8 students were interviewed. In another, 12 people who were either advisors, peer mentors, or instructors were interviewed. In that study, the authors also did a electronic survey, which would count as a quantitative methodology. However, the sample size was also fairly small, 100, and I think it was a little over 100, And there wasn't much discussion of the results of that survey in the final paper, actually. Here is an example how scholars working in the field of ethnic studies insert themselves into their work. So this is a quote from the paper by Aliman and Gaitan, in which they say, having taught the class several times, we each had our own archive of student work that comprised both in-class and take-home assignments. So here, the authors are sharing their own experiences and identifying themselves in the collective we, which is totally acceptable in the field of ethnic studies. In academia, every discipline has a specialized vocabulary that's used by scholars in that particular field. So in ethnic studies, there is a specialized vocabulary as well. And in using this vocabulary, the scholars signal what the field is about and make assumptions of the background knowledge of readers and listeners. So if you want to work in this field, you need to understand this specialized vocabulary so that when you read the term multiculturalism, for example, you understand what that means. The authors don't always give a definitional explanation of all the terms they use, so that's where I think they're making an assumption about what their readers or listeners know. Here are some examples of the specialized vocabulary terms that are used in the field of ethnic studies. These include terms such as multiculturalism, historical white spaces, colorblindness, minority-majority groups, whiteness studies, meritocracy, privilege, students of color, critical race theory, colonialism, capitalist, race politics, white supremacy, and inclusiveness. So if you're going to work or read in this field, you need to understand what they mean by these terms. Every academic field has its own genres, that is, places where they carry out their work. So in the case of ethnic studies, for example, that might mean publishing in such journals as Race, Ethnicity, and Education, or Ethnic and Racial Studies. That also might mean publishing books, scholarly books about your research. So, for example, one of the leading people in the field is Natasha Waraku, and she wrote a book in 2016 called The Diversity Bargain and Other Dilemmas of Race, Admissions, and Meritocracy at Elite Universities. And I want to just point out here, even in the title of this book, she's using some of those specialized vocabulary words that she's going to assume people interested in the book are going to know what they mean and why she's looking at those terms. Scholars also use national associations to share and talk and publicize their work, such as the National Association for Ethnic Studies and the Asian American Association. That's an example of a group, specialized group for people who are looking at Asian Americans in American society. And they also attend specialized conferences. So here's an example from Critical Ethnic Studies Association. Their annual conference a couple of years ago was on sovereignties and colonialisms. Again, they're signaling with those keywords what the conference is about and what its focus will be that year. This concludes my presentation on the rhetoric used in the field of ethnic studies. I hope you have a better understanding now of what the scholars working in this field, what they're interested in, what they value, what some of their specialized vocabulary is, and the kinds of genres that they use to carry out and publicize their work. This will help you if you're interested in becoming a scholar in this field. Thank you.